Velkommen og god dag alle sammen. Today we are speaking about divination in the Old Norse world. And a lot of people are speaking about that. Did the Vikings use runes for divination? Did they use seider for divination or völva? And we're going to look today at the actual evidence and see what was used, because we can learn from that. So we'll look at the sagas. Because there is some mention of divination in the Eddas, like Völuspá, of course, but as you know, the myths in the Eddas are not actually events that people believed happened. The myths are just filled with metaphors and they're symbolizing real aspects of nature and things like that. So that's why in this video I'm just covering the mentions of divination that are in the sagas and sources like that, because at least in the sagas we're pretty sure that these things happened, really. So first we'll look at Germania by Tacitus, which is the one most of you have heard of and the most famous one that everybody keeps going back to whenever we read a book about runes for divination and things like that. The Roman historian Tacitus spoke about how the Germanic tribes cut pieces of wood from a fruit-bearing tree and marked them with symbols, and then they did that to read their prophecy and give guidance to the person who they were reading for. Just to mention, though, this was just before the year 100, right about that time, when Tacitus wrote about this in the Germanic tribes. So about 700 years before the Viking Age, and probably 900 years or more before the sagas were actually written. So we don't know for sure if the Vikings would have done this too, but one thing we can say pretty certain is the Scandinavians around the year 100 probably would have been doing this, throwing the branches from a tree on the ground with symbols and reading from that. So I just released a video about this yesterday. The Vikings in the year 900 would have been pretty different from the people living in Germany and those areas in the year 900. But if we go back to the year 100, there would have been very, very little difference between those two people. So we're pretty sure that the Scandinavians probably used this method as well if the Germanic tribes were using it, as Tacitus spoke about. But go watch my video. I'll put that in the description below. I go into a lot more depth about that. So let's talk about the sagas. First thing about divination is it's a lot of the time practiced by völva when they're doing seider, as most of you know. Lots of the sagas speak about this, but the best description is in Eric's saga, the saga of Eric the Red. He gives a pretty detailed description. Also the saga of Gisli Surson. Also, one of the best accounts of the actual interpretation is in Vatnsdæla saga. Vatnsdæla, yeah, that's what it's called. I'll put all these up here. I'm doing this off of memory, so I'm forgetting the names right now. But those three are the ones that focus and give a pretty good detail about divination and how the völva use that. But there are lots more, but those are the three main ones if you want to go ahead and read those. So divination was definitely given by völva in the practice of seider or some other trance-like states like that. We also see some other mentions of divination in the sagas, and that was using the sacrifice chips, or I think blodspann is the word. Again, I'll put these up here. I'm doing this from memory, but a blodspann, which basically meant they were wooden chips, but also it meant spoon, as some linguists bring up. I think it's also probably related to the word spå, which of course means prediction or prophecy, just like you see in Völuspá. We see mentions of this in Gautrek's saga. They threw a chip down, one of these sacrifice chips, or blodspann, and they threw it down because they wanted to know how to get wind or how escape from this island because the army was stuck there on an island with no wind to sail away. And some of these, it mentions a few chips were thrown down, and sometimes it mentions just one was thrown down, depending on the saga. But I think in this saga, it was actually just one chip that was thrown down that they mentioned. And another one in the Landnamabok. They let the sacrifice chips fall to give a prediction, and this was to tell them where their enemy was moving in battle. It was more detailed than that, but yeah, you can read about this yourself. And Landnamabok. Another one in Ynglinga Saga. This is maybe the most famous one. The sacrifice chips fell down in a way that predicted that the person would not live very long. I think I forget the name of the king, but I'll put that up here. I'll put these titles up because I forget about them now, but I remember the stories at least. Also in Hervarar and Heidrek's saga, same thing. The sacrifice chips fell, and they predicted like a bad harvest, and they predicted a way that they could fix it like that. So that's about it for the sacrifice chips. We also see some lot casting that may have been used in divination, but probably not. And this was done with dice. We find a lot of dice in Viking graves, and they look like this. So I'll put a picture of here. There's lots of different types, but this is what most of them look like. But in most sources, actually, these seem to be played like a game, like a dice game, or also for making decisions. For example, in Geutrek's saga, which I just spoke about, when they found out that the wind was going to come, but they had to sacrifice someone to get the wind to come so they can escape the island. They threw the dice to decide who was going to be sacrificed. So it was kind of like pulling a short end of the stick, really, using dice. But I can't remember any instances in the sagas where dice was used for divination. So that's about it. There's a lot more, but I'll finish there. I just want to speak about a couple things we can learn from this. One, were they runes on these wood chips, on these sacrificial chips that they carved down to give their divination? So, well, we don't know for sure. We don't know for sure, but I really believe that there were runes on these, because, you know, if they weren't runes on the chips that they carved to give their divination, well, then what the hell were they? What kinds of symbols were they carving on the chips to give their divinations? I mean, we have nothing else that it could be. So Vikings had a few other symbols, like, you know, that we can find on rune stones and stuff like that, like the Valknut or the sun wheel, or maybe a raven or Sleipnir and stuff like that we see on the rune stones around. But these would have been absolutely impossible to carve on a little wood chip that big. Just imagine carving that out of Valknut or a picture of Odin on Sleipnir like you see in the rune stones. It would have been impossible. Runes were short, simple, easy to carve on, and all of them had a detailed, deep meaning that could have been, you know, easy to get some interpretation and divination from. So all the doubters out there that say these were not runes carved on the chips and these were not runes carved on the staves that Tacitus spoke about in Germania, I have not heard a single explanation or theory as to what other symbols were carved on these if it wasn't the runes. So if you're a doubter or something like that, don't just run your mouth and be stupid. If you're a doubter, come up with a better explanation as to what other options it could have been that were on these chips. And I would love to hear if you guys have any things. Like I said, we don't know for sure that runes were carved on this. It just makes the most sense. And I haven't heard any better arguments or theories. So if you guys have any, please let me know. But most PhD people and actual scholars don't even have some. But I would love to hear any ideas if you have any idea of what these symbols could be. So that's the first thing we learn. Second, It seems like in ancient times, the chips or pieces of wood were used for divination about a specific person, like in Tacitus, Germania. The priest would have given a reading using these chips for the person who needed the reading, for the person who was asking for the divination. Now, later on in the Viking Age, it seems that these wood chips were used to give predictions for bigger things, like the harvest or army movements, for example. So in the Viking Age, it seemed people kind of transitioned to using völva or people doing seider if they wanted a prediction or reading for themselves or a single individual. But when we see these sacrificial chips used in the Viking Age, it's usually divination for some type of bigger picture, not as a single individual trying to get some divination. So that's just the second thing we can learn from this. I don't know what that tells us really about all that and how we can use divination for us today, but it's just a thought. But do whatever you feel is special, guys, man. If the runes call to you, and if a specific type of divination calls to you and really seems meaningful to you and important, I think you should do it. If you are interested in this and drawn to something that strongly, it's because we have experienced these things positively in past lives. That's what I believe. So that's all the evidence you need, really. If you're drawn to the runes and want to use those as divination and really believe in them, go ahead and do it. There's a good chance that they were used for divination in ancient times. We don't know for sure, but just the fact that you believe it helps our theory about that. Because if we are reincarnated, like I believe, and like most of you probably believe, then we've experienced these things before. We're drawn to the runes as divination because we have used them as divination before in past lives for a long time. So that's all the evidence you need, really. Don't listen to the doubters. If you want to use the runes for divination, you can do that. If you want to use any type of thing for divination, you can do that. So that's my advice on this video. And vi ses nästa gång.